My name is Duran Chavis. I am the founder and director of Happily Natural Day. I am the founder of this festival, the Happily Natural Day. We've been doing it for almost 19 years. It was probably back in 2004 or 5 when I started meeting African-American farmers. They would bring their produce to the festival. We started talking about food security. And one of the questions that was posed to me is that, what would you do if the grocery stores closed? And it was really hard for me to answer the question. I didn't know what I would do. So right after that, we started doing pop-up farmers markets, connecting communities that had limited access to healthy food to the farmer, like by bringing the farmer directly to those neighborhoods and selling produce. While working with those farmers, I started feeling guilty because these were older men, like my grandfather's age. I'm in my 20s, they had to be in their 60s, 70s, right? I started feeling like, well, Dad, if something happens to this brother, who's bringing like 200-300 pounds of produce every week into the city, this whole program has to stop because we don't have a connect. We don't have a way to get the produce. So out of those conversations and out of that guilt, I started my first garden in 2012, right? And it was those relationships that pulled me into this work. I kind of tell people I fell backward into gardening. It wasn't something that I was seeking out to do. It was something that, called me to it by virtue of just the evolution of the work.
Starting a business is a risky venture, but that doesn't mean you have to go it alone. You need a formation company that will support you, not bury you deeper into financial stress. Unfortunately, some companies use squint pricing by hiding their fees in the fine print.
The biggest inequity that I see in Richmond is just wealth inequities. Growing up in Richmond, I grew up on South Side. When I learned about redlining or what have you, it was one thing for somebody to say, like, this is where, the homes where people that didn't get redlined live. And it was another to, like, grow up in those communities and then be working in spaces that took me into those neighborhoods where the redlining didn't happen. And seeing just the disparity in how real it is when you see it in the built environment, like who has access to the river, who has access to green space, and what's the quality of those green spaces. The food conversation is one where it was really apparent. Like Carytown had like 4 grocery stores within 1 block, while on the side of town that I grew up at, you could walk 5 miles and there's no grocery store on the main artery, right? So that wealth disparity, was one of the priority disparities, and one of the most elusive, for us to try to cut across when people talk about, racial inequity. It's like when we start to talk about money and who has it and who doesn't have it, is all of a sudden people start, losing focus and they lose grasp of the tangible solutions that could be done. So, I think the wealth one is the most stark and the most important for us to address. So, a racially equitable Richmond, to me, looks like communities of color, Black and brown folks, people of African ancestry, having ownership, having land, having control over the systems that they're most impacted by. And so, because my work lands squarely around food systems, the way I articulate it is like, we have to have control over our local food system. And when I say we, I mean Black people in the communities that they live in should be the producers, distributors, restaurateurs, or whatever you want to call it, product makers of the food. it's like the most important thing. It's like something that everybody's gonna do, like no matter what. But at the same time, I also feel like, housing, like land is really, for me, the one thing that can help equalize, the equity conversation. It could equalize the control piece, the power piece. And because we don't have land, we don't have housing. Because we don't have land, we don't have food, we don't have farms. Because we don't have land, we don't have commercial properties. You know what I mean? All the things that equal a healthy community, it all comes down to who has control over the land, and we just don't have that control. So in my mind, land redistribution, land ownership, community land trust, like all of that work can help pull community power back into the hands of the folks that are experiencing, these racial inequities. Like Black people, if we had those elements, then we could start to forge, the reality that we want to see for ourselves.
In a world where academic deadlines meet the blank page.
Grammarly?
Hi, yes.
I'm inspired by the work of New Communities, Inc., Shirley Sherrod and Charles Sherrod down in Atlanta. I'm also inspired by the work of organizations like the Agrarian Trust up in Boston. Both of those organizations have been focused on how do we do housing and agriculture together so that people have access to food and sovereignty, while at the same time they're housing stable, right? And they have ownership of their homes in their neighborhoods or in their areas. The unique thing about the Agrarian Trust is that this is a white-led organization that aspires to work with local communities to raise the money for land acquisition. And, the community land trust model is that the community land trust as a nonprofit owns the land and keeps that in the community control. And then, you as a community member can own the home, for however long you want to own it. And I think that's a really cogent strategy, is having white folks use their privilege and use their access to wealth and their access to capital to redistribute land back into the hands of Black and brown communities. And I feel like that's the work that we're venturing into here in the city, working with the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust as they raise money to purchase land so that we can build neighborhoods that have farming centralized as a form of entrepreneurship and access to green space for families here in our region. People like to use the word equity, and I say people, I mean like white folks like to use the word equity as a placeholder. But I think when we as Black people and other oppressed minority or quote unquote minorities use the word equity, we're really alluding to justice, to us getting towards a just reality, right? Equity is just a stepping stone, like having solutions that take into consideration the historical problems and what fractured our communities, and like putting things in place to address those things is one thing. But I feel like the other thing is like we're all striving for justice, you know what I mean? For our communities to be whole in light of all of the oppressions that we faced over the last 400 years or what have you. And I feel like it's important for quote unquote allies to realize that this is not a work that you can like step your foot into and when it gets too hot, pull it out, because, as Black and brown people, we don't get that luxury, right? From microaggressions to macro systemic racism issues, we're always in it. I would implore folks to use their privilege so that we can grasp towards and latch on to justice. Like latch on to justice instead of latching on to diversity or inclusion. Like, what is the just thing? What is the work that your organization could be doing to undo all of these isms that have created these inequities that we've been talking about over the course of the last couple of weeks and the last couple of months, and even that have been addressed in the racial equity essays. Like, there's so many different spaces. So find your space and root yourself in it. You know what I mean? Like I feel like sometimes we jump into this work and folks don't really believe that we can undo this thing. You know what I mean? So use your power, use your privilege to reach for justice, and let's undo this thing. I'm hoping that everyone gets some inspiration from this project, and I hope folks find themselves and their work centered in it, you know, whether it be through the videos or the podcasts or the essays. Like, I think there's something for everybody to learn from and be inspired by. So.